Hello guys, Bearsyke here. So how you doing? Well, I'm doing just fine. Yeah, of course this video is not scripted. It's just me talking, but just about the subject at hand, about what I've learned since I've, had a love doll and, just things like, kind of even before then actually, to be frank. I'm gonna put that down. And where should I start? Well, I guess one of the first things I learned when I started kind of getting into it when I was about 20, 21 years old. Moved out of my parents' house. And the first time I saw like a legitimate love doll, it was kind of I guess it looked like a TPE doll. They had just come out with them. I think at the time, actually, I read, afterwards, a few years later, they actually had just come out with them. And I saw it on Amazon, of all places, actually. But of course, at the time there weren't very many sites. This is like what 2011, maybe 2012 at the most. At the time, when I was figuring out about this stuff, and kind of like I said before, I'm gonna say a few things I've said before, obviously, and just how I just used to think how this kind of stuff used to just be for losers. I used to also just think like this kind of stuff was just for people that were abused by their mothers or something. That only the kind of person that would get into a doll like that would be the kind of person that was abused or of some sorts, drastically abused, or was like a Jeffrey Dahmer or something, or just stuff like that. And I also used to kind of think this other notion like the kind of person that would get adult something kind of like this or something like a mannequin was the kind of person that's only liked dolls. They only preferred dolls. You know what I mean? That they just only had a fetish for dolls. And of course, soon after that, I learned that wasn't true. And then, what was it? Within a week after that, I was like, oh, so these, lifelike, looking dolls, they're made of a thing called silicone, right? And I'm thinking like, oh yeah, I know what silicone is. So silicone is a kind of a rubber-based material, you know. And then I discover Real Doll, which is the first, of course, main like love doll site that I discovered, and it was kind of only one of the few good ones at the time, really. And they're like, our dolls are made out of medical grade silicone, and all that. And I thought, wow, this stuff is very neat. I thought, and I thought, this is the kind of this stuff is very detailed. It's very advanced, up to date, advanced. This stuff is really neat and artistic and everything. Like I just had no idea, at the time. And sometimes I will still show this to somebody, and I will get the same reaction out of them that they never knew. To this day, even 10 years later, I'll show this to somebody, they'll be like, I had no idea that this kind of stuff existed. This is like Blade Runner stuff here. And I'm just like, well, I wouldn't say it's that advanced, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of like that, I guess, if you look at it that way. But, and, was it a couple years later, I was kind of thinking to myself one day, as I was actually living in this place actually at the time, I had moved in here and I just thought, you know what? I've been, a Star Wars fan. I've been I've been a gun advocate. I mean, I've been a knife advocate. I've been a car advocate kind of. And then, here comes this thing out of nowhere. Now it's like I'm a freaking doll advocate. It seems like I'm like obsessively looking into this stuff, trying to look into its history and all that. And I just one day thought, you know what? What do I want to do? Just what the heck do I want to do? I mean, because even before then, I've already kind of realized, I don't have to live the traditional life that I was taught when I was younger. And another thing I learned, of course, recently around that time was, everything that I was taught was good and fun at the time was just a bunch of BS. I mean, not completely, to say the least. I mean, I know there's people that like certain things, and to, there's still some people that like to get married. Some, like my stepbrother Michael, and my now sister, kind of Leslie, and so on. There's still people getting into relationships that like to live the boring Christian lifestyle that I've, of course, moved on from. But I of course was realizing, you know, it just is not as exciting as they say it is. Even just little things like living in a mansion. I've lived in a mansion when I used to live in Burlington when I was homeschooled. That's while I was homeschooled actually for about 4 grade years, and like, man, it is fucking boring. It's just boring, 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 boring. Almost everything that I've tried traditionally was just it just turned out to be fucking boring. And I also kind of realized a lot of the things that I was taught was fun, was just so some company could take advantage of me so that they could sell some junk to me, whether it's a car I don't need or a house I don't need necessarily, at least. Of course, we all want these things, but it's not like we actually need them. But I of course learned, this is something that I wanted to do. This was something new, and this was something I wanted to do and wanted to try out. And so, of course, I get one. I get, a Teddy Babe one because I didn't want to. I, of course, didn't feel like spending $2,000 to $3,000 on a doll, which is that. And TPE at the time still wasn't really that reliable. It's gone kind of better now, as you can kind of see when you get one nowadays. But yeah, you could say there was a lot more going on at the time. But anyway, so I get one of those, and I kind of do everything or almost everything with this doll besides take it out. Like I've maybe seen some, I guess you might call all idolaters do. People that are kind of dedicated to their dolls and have relationships and do everything with them and so on. I at least no, it wasn't necessarily like that, but I did do quite a few things. I was kind of, it's kind of to say the least bored. I was actually also kind of bored. I hate to say it. I've kind of tried again. I kind of had tried a lot of the other things that were suggested to me at the time, and I just, you could say I'm kind of a hard person to get excited. Don't get me wrong, but it just simply wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And I kind of realized, nowadays, you know, we are kind of getting into this phase where we are just kind of, trying to fulfill our fantasies and our goals nowadays. Where nowadays, lots of people are taught that, we're, we want to go towards our fantasies and our goals versus, things like family and just other important things like that, to say the least. Not to say that it's all bad, but it is kind of a thing, to say the least. And that's kind of where this kind of stuff sometimes kind of comes in. When it comes to these love dolls, it's kind of a fantasy thing where you're trying to kind of create your fantasy with this doll instead of using a real woman to create your fantasy, obviously. Essentially using her as an object of your fantasy, essentially. But, and of course, with that, I realized, we've always just, again, I've said this before, we've always just only had each other. When you think about it, I mean, we've always kind of had toys, like pocket pussies and stuff. I mean, that kind of stuff has actually been around since even my father was young. But nowadays, with the new technology that we have nowadays, now we actually have a viable option. And while it's not necessarily having sex, it sure as heck feels like it, to say the least. I mean, you can basically kind of have sex without having sex, which is kind of the crazy thing nowadays. And with that, I have also kind of seen all the way that other people, because there's still a lot of people, they're trying to get laid. And here I am on my PS4, right? I'm playing video games, and from time to time, I will see these guys. They'll try to actually make other guys look bad because they're trying to get it sometimes with these women. And sometimes these women are actually married or in relationships, to say the least. And they're kind of being inappropriate sometimes, but you've also got to kind of look at it from their perspective. They've gone to a point where they probably haven't had sex or intimacy, I would say, for probably longer than they, should have been neglected, to say the least. And it can be hard on us. We can get desperate, or we can feel a bit, just like we need it. Sex is kind of one of those things that if you have it, it becomes not such a big deal. But when you don't have it, it's just like it becomes everything. I swear to fucking God, it's just insane. But at the same time, I feel that since I've actually gotten a love doll, that I've actually matured a bit. And it's not like I've been going around just hitting on women all the time, but now it's kind of different because now I'm looking at these guys that are doing these sometimes really immature, things just to get laid. And I'm just looking at that and I'm thinking, wow, just look at the position that we used to be in, before we learned about love dolls and just stuff like, what I know today. But, I've in a sense learned that, it's kind of ridiculous, and that in a sense we actually do kind of need these love dolls in a sense. That because otherwise we are the only option. There's like no other viable option. But with these love dolls, at least we kind of have an option besides just each other, at least in a sense. And I've kind of met people that, they've said things like, oh, I'm not into dolls and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking that sometimes when they say stuff like that, they are thinking of like a Raggedy Ann doll or something when they say something like that. And, so I tell them, no, it's not like that. Like these dolls seriously look like real people. Like they look like people. They don't just look like the doll that some doll, like a vinyl doll that you see at a store or something, or that you put on your table. They don't just look like your mannequin at a store. These dolls legit look real. They seriously do. And if you've ever seen one, you would know what I mean, especially with like a high-end, silicone-based doll. I mean, they legit look real. They seriously are getting kind of close to that realistic look. And I also had actually a chat with my mother the other day, before I forget. And she was talking to me about how recently, like within a week ago, she talked to me about how this one guy, in fact, it's actually happened with multiple guys now, where she will talk to them for at least a few weeks on end. And recently she met with one of these guys that she had been talking to for weeks on the internet, and within a few hours, he finally came out with it and said, "Hey, I want this one thing, aka sex," you know. And then, of course, my mother was like, okay, I was here for like a full on relationship, but okay, see ya. And that's kind of another thing that, kind of like I was saying before, kind of one of those, just ridiculous situations that you might get into when it comes to trying to get laid. If it's like we sometimes have to do all this work in order to get sex the cheapest way possible because otherwise, there's is really very good assurance that the hook, if you let's say go out with a hooker, that they aren't going to have a sexual disease or that they aren't going to take your things when you fall asleep in your apartment after you have sex with them, or they aren't going to kill you once you get to the apartments and take all your stuff, or so on and so forth. I mean, if you're going to have sex with a high-end woman, a high-end hooker, you would have to go somewhere to like downtown New York or Las Vegas, pay like a few $1,000s at least, and hopefully they won't have the sexual disease at least, and hopefully they'll actually be attractive or at least look attractive, and so on and so forth. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, it's just so ridiculous. And that's another thing that I've learned when, soon after I got my love doll, these are just things that I've just thought about. You know what I mean? That we now have kind of an option, besides just having sex with each other, to say the least. And recently, some of my friends have actually noted that they've been started seeing people recently actually with their love dolls. In fact, my mother's boyfriend stated that he saw somebody actually on a bike with a love doll. And, we were talking about how, it it's not like you can't find somebody. It's not like you can't really find somebody, out there for a relationship. But, you kind of have to admit, it's kind of ridiculous when you really think about it. I mean, you could go through God knows how many people and so many dates before you actually find somebody. But then you've also got to think about other factors. I mean, you've also got to look out for all the people that aren't trying to scam you over the internet, aren't asking you for money over the internet, or kind of like the guys that were with my mother who were just all along looking for sex anyway and weren't actually looking for a real relationship. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, for one, how oversexed this country has become, which is another reason why I think that we actually need these love dolls, because otherwise I just don't think, it's going to be very healthy. There are some places, even in Iowa, where the places have and areas have become so unsanitary that they're quite literally just starting to give out condoms for free. They seriously are. It's become so unsanitary of the oversexualization that it's just become ridiculous. I mean, it's the same thing happened with Rome, and look what happened to them. But, Rome didn't have some of the technology that we had today. We've never had the kind of technology that we've had today. So, if anything, I think a lot of people, especially if they're a little bit old-fashioned, they need to stop looking at the stigma part of it, and they, at the very least, need to kind of be more accepting to it. And of course, I'm not going to say to anybody that they just need to go out and get a love doll, but what I'm stating is just stop being so damn ridiculous about it. It's actually more healthy this way. And, don't look at it as just an overall bad thing. Because even now, it's not really all that bad, but, we need to adjust. We can't just look to the past all the time. we need to adjust, just like I've had to adjust. With that being said, I guess I'll end the video. If you guys have any more questions, I'll try and answer them. And I'll see you guys later. Bye.